It's falling from the clouds, a strange and lovely sound. I can hear it in the thunder and the rain. It's ringing in the skies like cannons in the night. The music of the universe plays. We're singing, you are holy, great and mighty. The moon and the stars declare who you are. I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. Forever my heart will sing of how great you are. Beautiful and free, the song of galaxies, reaching far beyond the Milky Way. Let's join in with the sound. Come on, let's sing it out as the music of the universe plays. We're singing, you are holy, great and mighty. The moon and the stars declare who you are. I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. Forever my heart will sing of how great you are. All glory, honor, power is yours. Amen. All glory, honor, power is yours. Amen. All glory, honor, power is yours forever. Amen. We're singing, you are holy, great and mighty. The moon and the stars declare who you are. I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. Forever my heart will sing of how great you are.
All right, man. That was such a special treat. I'm glad we got to do that tonight. Thank you to those guys for leading us in worship. And I do want to say a special thank you to Anna and Alicia just for all the hard work they've done in this time and really throughout this year to prepare the worship that we get to do on Wednesday nights. And for Catalyst Live, they were such big advocates for trying to find a way to get us to have this worship as being a part of the Catalyst Live experience. And so I appreciate the work that they did to get all that stuff together and still make that available for us, because it's so important for us to be able to worship, and it's so important to what we do. And so thank you guys for all that work that you've done, and really to everybody who's on that worship team throughout this whole year. I wish that we were in person and we could really do those thank yous like we normally do at the end of the year. But if you're on the worship team and you've helped out with that this last year, thank you guys for all the hard work that you put in. So with that in mind, we're going to kind of switch over a little bit to talking about forgiveness. So before we do, though, so some of you guys maybe you've seen the worship team and you've looked at them up on stage and you've thought to yourself, man, that doesn't look too bad. I'd love to kind of play one of those instruments. And if that's you, we'd love to have you guys jump in there and actually jump in and learn how to play these different instruments. Maybe you guys have made that leap and decided, I want to go for it. And then you started practicing and realized, wow, this is actually way harder than it looked, and it's kind of difficult. And sometimes those moments happen, right? I remember for myself, one of those moments very vividly was whenever I went skiing. So I had a friend of mine, and so skiing is a huge hobby of mine. And so I have a friend that lives up in in Colorado. He actually used to live in Vail, which is just super cool. I'm very envious of that. And so I went up to visit him one time, and we went skiing together. Right, and so I'd never gone skiing where there was a terrain park in there, and so I've seen people like in the X Games and Olympics, stuff like that, where they do these huge jumps and stuff like that. But I've never personally done a terrain park because I've never been at something where they did a terrain park, and so I decided that this place, hey, there was a terrain park. And I thought, well, that doesn't look so hard. I'm just going to do real simple. There was like a little rail that was just poking out of the snow. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to ski over it and I'll just grind it real quick. I'm not going to do anything crazy. I'm not going to try to jump onto it. I'm not going to like do some sort of weird, trick or something like that. I'm just going to simply just go up to it and slowly just kind of grind over it, right? Well, what happened is I got up there and I had no idea just how slick these rails are that you grind over. In fact, they're slicker than the ice that you ski on. And so the moment that my skis touched that rail, my skis immediately left out from underneath me, and I just ate it so hard. I mean, I had so much confidence going into this, thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to grind this rail. And that confidence evaporated as my face struck the ground. I mean, it just instantly gone. And so maybe you guys have had those moments where you felt pretty confident about something. You thought, well, that doesn't look too bad. And then you try it, and it's a lot more difficult than it looks. And so the reason we say that is because tonight when we talk about forgiveness is kind of the same way. It's a lot harder than it looks and a lot harder than it sounds. Because it's way easy for us to just say, I forgive you. And we may even understand what the idea of forgiveness is. If we were to say what is forgiveness, we'd all probably come up with the same definition. We know that whenever someone hurts us, that we should forgive them, that they've done something to us, and therefore we forgive them, that we shouldn't hold on to a grudge. That's probably not a new concept to you, and it certainly isn't something that you've never heard of before. We probably all have heard of forgiveness. But actually forgiving someone in real life, because forgiveness is easy, when we think about this, forgiveness is easy until you actually have to do it, right? When we do it in real life, it's not so simple. And Jesus knew that. And he even understood that. He said that we may understand this idea of forgiveness, but we're going to struggle to do it, which is why I think Jesus tells us this story specifically the way he does tonight, which brings us to the story in the series that we've been in, which is called The Storyteller, where we're looking at these stories that Jesus told. And so tonight we're actually going to be in Matthew chapter 18. So if you have your Bibles, you want to flip over there, we're going to be in 18, and we're going to start in verse 21. And verse 21 is going to give us the context that leads up into this story, because the context is so important. So let's check out verse 21, right? Well, so what happens is we got Peter, who's one of Jesus's 12 disciples, right? So he's like one of the closest people to Jesus. In fact, like he might be Jesus's best friend. And he comes up to Jesus and he asks him this question. He says, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? How many times should I do it? Is 7 good enough? I feel like 7's a pretty good amount, right? And now Peter understands how difficult forgiveness is, right? Which is why he's asking just how much is required of him, because he's thinking, man, surely there's got to be a limit to our forgiveness where, after I've forgiven somebody enough times, then, man, that mercy's got to end somewhere. And so he says, it's like a teacher who comes to you guys, and he says, okay, I want you guys to go home and work some math problems at home. And the first thing that you would probably want to know working those math problems is, well, how many problems do I have to do, right? How many of these math problems am I going to have to do? Because we don't really want to do more than we need to, because these math problems that we do are hard and they're frustrating. And forgiveness is like that as well. And so Peter's basically asking, Lord, how many problems do you want me to do? How many do I have to do? Because it's going to be difficult. And so Peter asks, can I stop after 7 times? And when you understand the context of forgiveness within Jewish law under which Peter lived, 7 times was actually going way above and beyond. And I think part of the reason he throws out the number 7 is because in the Bible, 7 is a pretty significant number. It represented the number of God and also represented completion of totality. You think all the way back to Genesis that the world was created in 7 days. And on the 7th day, he rested to signify completion of all that was created. Right? And so he throws this number out saying, well, man, if I've forgiven somebody 7 times, surely I've completed forgiveness to totality there. And so Peter probably felt like his question kind of gave him like some brownie points with Jesus, made him appear super spiritually holy. Like, oh, surely that's the biblical answer, the Old Testament answer for what I need to do. And so you can imagine that Peter might have been a little surprised when this is how Jesus responded. He says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, right? Now, you may be reading in a Bible translation that says 70 times 7, which is even more, right? And think about this. What is Jesus saying? Did Jesus just really say, okay, well, 77, you missed it, Peter, 7 times was too little, but 77 is actually right. And so if you just will get that together, then 77 is seems about right. No, Jesus is throwing out something way bigger than what Peter proposed to show that what Peter's wanting to do is not significant enough, and so much so that it's eclipsed by what Jesus actually expects from us. And Jesus doesn't say that we should literally forgive somebody 77 times. He has something even bigger, which is why he pivoted to tell this story right here. In chapter 18, verse 23, it says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered what he and his wife and his children, all of them he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. Right, so Jesus tells this story. So in the context of talking about forgiveness, in the context of being asked about forgiveness, all of a sudden he pivots to this story about a man and a king who is owed a great debt, and he's talking about money. Why? Why is he doing this? Why does the story focus on debt? Because he's showing us what forgiveness is. That forgiveness is needed because there's a debt that exists. And we think about this. When somebody does something to us, what causes us to be angry and what we need to forgive is that they took something from us. And we feel that, which is why we might say the phrase, well, we need to make it right. And what we need to by making it right is they need to make up what was taken, right? If somebody says something mean to you, what they take from you is your reputation. Right? Maybe somebody broke your favorite pencil and now they got it. To make it right means your favorite pencil's got to be back, right? Maybe they ate the last mozzarella stick and, you need some forgiveness for that. You need to offer that forgiveness. Maybe I'm talking about that because that's in my heart. I need to forgive because somebody ate my last mozzarella stick. And there's a debt in which where this man exists in this story where he's talking about this man who was owed a debt and a man who had that debt laid on him, right? And he's showing us to illustrate the same thing about forgiveness, that forgiveness exists because there's a debt that has been made in us. There's some sort of exchange that's been taken away from us, and forgiveness is what's going to get us back to that. And so he sets up this story where this man exists in this huge debt, right? It says that he owes 10,000 bags of gold. Right now, a bag of gold was a talent, right? And so maybe your Bible translation says that he owed 10,000 talents. Same thing. Gold, bag of gold, talent, same thing. If you want to know how much that was worth in their days, 1 talent was equal to about 20 years worth of day wages. So if a guy worked every day for 20 years, that salary that he would get for 20 years worth of working would have equal to 1 bag of gold. And this guy owed 10,000 of those. 10,000, which is 20,000 years worth of day wages. That's insane. And I don't know what this guy was doing to get in this much debt, but he's in this debt, that much debt, and it's crazy. He's like, he pleads with his, this king, and he's like, man, just give me some more time, I'll pay it back. Well, yeah, you're gonna pay it back, and what, how are you gonna live for 20,000 years, right? There's no way that he's going to ever be able to pay this back, even though he makes this claim. And so the people that are listening to this story, they know this, and they're probably shocked when they hear this. And their first thought is probably, how in the world did he get in that much debt? And then what did he do with all that money that he borrowed? What did he spend it on? How could you possibly spend that, 20,000 years worth of wages and it just be gone? What did you do, man? Anyways, but think about it. If you owed somebody like $2 million and you didn't have the money to pay them back, and then they wanted to have you arrested, you're stressed out about what's going to happen. And you beg for them not to put you in jail, and you get told that your debt has just disappeared. Right? You no longer owe anything. Imagine how great you would feel. And that's what this guy in the story is feeling. For someone to get a break on money they owed like this, we expect them to be incredibly impacted by this type of guy is just insanely in debt. I mean, like, this is like more than like I went to college kind of debt. This is like just insane. But it's not the end of the story. Jesus continues and he says in verse 28, he says, but when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins, right? Now, this is not 10,000 bags of gold. This is 100 silver coins, which are less significant than even one gold coin, right? So he owes him a significantly, like a minuscule amount than what he owed, right? And so you immediately think, well, this guy who's been forgiven of a great debt, right? What's he supposed to do? Well, the easy answer is, given the gigantic debt that's been lifted off this man, you would think that the natural reaction would be for him to forgive this tiny amount of coins. Nope, that's not what he does, right? It's not what he does at all. Instead, he grabbed this man who owed him and he begins to choke him. And he says, pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay off that debt. Right now, obviously, the story went in a way different direction than we kind of think it should go in. Right. And in fact, it goes in a kind of an unnecessarily violent. I'm not really sure why the guy had to. I mean, he already could throw him in prison, but then he's like choking him. I mean, it's so excessive. Right. But it goes in a different direction on purpose, because what Jesus is trying to show us is because we understand what should happen. And often we understand that we probably should forgive people. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for us. And so he tells us this story. And we all know what the natural reaction should be, but this man doesn't do it. And the same thing is for us. When it comes to forgiveness, we maybe know that we should do it, but we don't, because it's not easier. It's much easier to just say, well, I'm going to hold it to us, right? And why? Why do we hold on to that? Because they took something from us. What was done to us was very real, that they did take something from us. These aren't just monetary debts that we're talking about in our lives that we feel. Someone did something very real to us and we feel robbed, right? And we don't like the fact that it's not right. And we don't want to let it go because it was wrong, right? Think about that. They didn't... They did, by their mean things, actually ruin your reputation, right? Your favorite pencil is still broke, right? There aren't any more mozzarella sticks left. And the sad part is what this shows us is that often when something is taken from us, when somebody does something to us, what they took from us is not necessarily something you can get back. You won't always be able to get that thing back. And we may want it to be made right, but there may not be a way for it to be remade right and for them to repay that, which is the same situation that this man was in. There's no way for him to be able to repay that. And you think about this, an example would be, how could a father make up to his son lost years where he was an absent father? Well, he can't make up those years, right? Those years are gone. They've already passed. And so forgiveness for the son is going to be difficult. It's difficult because there's nothing that the father can do to remake up what was lost. And so you may be feeling that tonight, that your pain is real and they did do wrong to you and it's difficult. But here's what's incredible about this story, and really kind of challenging if we're being honest, is that Jesus doesn't let us off the hook just because it's difficult. He doesn't look at us and say, well, I understand that you are feeling pain. I'm not going to do anything. He's going to challenge us in this, and he's going to say, I'm not going to let you off the hook. Right? So let's check out verse 31, what Jesus has to say. He says, in the rest of the story, when the other servants saw what had happened, where this man who had been forgiven this incredible debt goes out and then immediately chokes out and then has another friend thrown in jail because that guy couldn't pay him back. It says that when they saw that, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. He said, you wicked servant. He said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? Right? And Jesus does that, and we all know that. We all think, well, duh, that's the way he should have acted. We all know, man, this is absolutely the way it should have been. That when we read this story, it's a surprise that he would act this way to us, and we think that. And it says that, here's what the master does. In verse 34, it says, in anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. Right? And so just think about that. How in the world is a man who's being tortured in jail ever going to be able to pay back? He's not, right? And so because he would not forgive, he's going to spend a lifetime of being in jail and being tortured, right? Now, the owner's like, come on, man, what are you doing? I forgave you way more than what you had to forgive. And he missed an opportunity to show a small amount of forgiveness immediately after he was shown a huge forgiveness. What was he thinking? And Jesus adds the exclamation point to this story when he goes on in verse 35. And he says, this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Right, so what does Jesus mean by this? Well, remember that this is a parable. Right? This is a story that Jesus is telling. And so it doesn't mean that you're literally going to be put in jail or you're literally going to be tortured if you don't forgive. But think about it. The last time that you held on to a grudge, who hurt the most was probably you, right? Or it probably wasn't the person who did something against you, right? And most of the time when somebody does something, they may not even know or even really care that they hurt you. And so they're going to go about their lives. But what it does to us when we hold on to this grudge is it actually hurts us. And so because refusing to forgive becomes its own type of punishment and torture. And so what Jesus is doing is he's challenging us to forgive when it's difficult because he knows how necessary it is for us to be able to experience forgiveness. And this is huge because when we think about forgiveness, we usually think it's meant for the other person, right? And so we say, words like, so we say the words with you, but in our hearts what we do is we hold on to that anger, and what we do is we miss the whole point of it. That forgiveness was not just for them, that it's actually for us. And it's not for the person that wronged us. That forgiveness is a tool for us to experience freedom. And when we don't offer forgiveness the way it's meant to be, all we're doing is actually robbing ourselves, and we send ourselves off to a prison and a torture of its own. And so back to Peter's question that he asked Jesus at the very beginning of this, when we looked at this tonight, how many times should I forgive? Well, is forgiving 7 times enough? Nope. Because if you're keeping track and you have to count how many times you forgive somebody, it's you haven't let go. And you haven't forgiven enough when you're no longer being tortured by the offense that was done to you, then you've forgiven enough and you're finally free. But that's not all. That's not the point. That's not the only point of this story. Because the story also is not just to give us a lens into what forgiveness is and how we actually solve forgiveness, how we operate forgiveness. It's supposed to meant to shift our attention from what was done to us towards the things that we've done, things that God has generously forgiven us of. And so it's a lot easier to hold on to a grudge when we see ourselves as the good one, as the victim. When we see ourselves as the victim, of course we want to hold on to those. But when our eyes are open to all the ways that we aren't perfect either, giving people a break becomes a lot easier. And so let's be clear. Jesus has forgiven us of a lot. And if he can offer forgiveness for every single sin that we've ever committed in our entire lives against him, then we can pass that forgiveness on to other people. And so as long as we think that we're better than someone else and what they've done to us, forgiveness will be a tough thing for us to demonstrate. But Jesus' story points out it's all connected. All of these are connected. Our ability to forgive others is directly tied to our willingness to receive forgiveness. And we can't expect forgiveness from others if we aren't willing to give it as well. Andy Stanley had this to say about forgiveness. He said, "In the shadow of my hurt, forgiveness feels like a decision to reward my enemy. But in the shadow of the cross, forgiveness is merely a gift from one undeserving soul to another. Forgiveness is the gift that ensures my freedom from prison of bitterness and resentment." Right, and so what he means by this quote is he's saying, in the shadow of my hurt, or when I view things through my own hurt, forgiveness feels like me rewarding my enemy for doing something wrong to me, that I'm letting them off the hook for something that was done wrong. He says, but whenever I view the situation through the lens of the cross, what it actually becomes is me offering a gift from somebody who doesn't deserve it. Yeah, because they don't deserve it. They did do something wrong to us. But guess what? We're also undeserving as well. And he's saying that when we view things through the cross, when we realize how undeserving we are, we're willing to give things to people who are undeserving of stuff from us. And so forgiveness then becomes a gift for us, that we can be free of this bitterness and resentment that's going to torture us. And so for many of us in the church, we have to remind ourselves that we're not as perfect as we sometimes think we are. And that can be challenging, because as Christians, we do get good at doing the right things more often than not. And we're vulnerable to fall into pride. And our pride is an ugly obstacle into loving and forgiving others. You know, our judgmental attitude, it'll cut other people to the core. And the secret sins that we have in our lives, they're a lot bigger, and they could hurt a lot more people than maybe we're willing to admit. And the words towards our parents would probably surprise a lot of people. You know, or our envy and our jealousy may not show itself on the outside, but we know it's brewing on the inside. And so we withhold forgiveness, thinking, how could they do that, man? How could they act like that? And what we really mean is I would never do that to somebody else. And we may not do that specific thing that they did to us, but what Jesus wants us to see is that we are in fact all broken, and we all have some brokenness in us that needs to be forgiven. And when we realize that, we understand everybody else's capacity to make mistakes and be broken as well. And so we have a pile of sins that Jesus was willing to forgive over and over and over again. You think about this man in the story who owed 200,000 years of debt. You know, that's way more than a lifetime of that he was going to be able to owe this man. And Jesus died on the cross, a lifetime's of sin for you. And I don't tell you that to bring you down, but instead to empower you to pass it along. That Jesus forgave you, and that enables us to then pass along that forgiveness. That Jesus has led the way in demonstrating the power of forgiveness, and we get to follow his lead. All right, now, imagine with me, I want you guys to kind of think about this activity, and I wish we could do it in person. And so maybe tonight you want to actually, after this video's over, after we get done tonight, maybe you want to do this activity on your own to kind of visualize it. But I want you guys to imagine with me that you have two cards sitting in front of you that you're going to write on, right? One says, what I did to someone, and the other says what someone did to me, right? So two on there, right? So what I did to someone and what someone did to me. Now imagine if you filled out the first card, right, with things you've done recently to wrong someone else. It may take a minute for you to think through this and to think, what have I done to somebody? But even if you hurt someone unintentionally, it counts as an offense that you've committed against them. Now imagine that you're filling out the second card. Right now, this will probably come a lot quicker to you. It's probably a lot easier for us to think about all the things that other people have done to us. right? What did somebody do us, and what is something that somebody has done to you that you're still holding on to? It doesn't matter if it happened yesterday or 5 years ago, because if you're still feeling it and you don't have freedom from it, then imagine that you're writing it down. And so, in the light of that, think of these two cards of what you've done and need forgiveness for, and what someone has done to you that you need to forgive them up. And what you need to receive forgiveness for, and what you need to give forgiveness for are connected, right? These two are connected, where freedom is found when you can give forgiveness as well as receive it. And that's where the true freedom comes. And here's what you need to know, that you've already been forgiven by God, right? All you have to do is confess to God, and He forgives. Right? He forgives. It's the moment it leaves our mouth, the moment that we confess, He has already forgiven us. And He's forgiven a lot. Now, it's your turn to pass it along. Right now, which is where these two cards come together. Now, forgiveness is easy until you actually have to do it. And a lot of times it's not just a one-time thing. Sometimes we have to do it over and over and over again. Sometimes a person offends us so bad that we have to forgive them for it over and over and over again. And it's going to keep coming back, and you're probably still going to feel some angry thoughts towards that person. But you have to choose to forgive them. And every time it pops in there, you're going to have to make that choice again to forgive them. And sometimes we have to forgive someone for repeated offenses again and again. Now, the point is, the story about bags of gold isn't just about us. As with all the stories that we've looked at, it tells something about the storyteller, Jesus, that He forgave us so that we could be free from the power of sin. But when we don't forgive others, we aren't free anymore. We're missing out on the free life that He wants for us. And that's why He tells us this story, to remind us, because of what He has done, that we have more power than we can imagine to be able to forgive others again and again. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for you guys, and then we're going to roll those questions. Don't forget about Lifehouse on Sunday if you're a high school student, 7:15 at the church. Would love to have you guys join us. What I want to do is I want to pray for you guys tonight, but I want to kind of pray for two kind of specific groups of people tonight. Maybe those of you that are tonight that are really struggling to extend forgiveness. Maybe something really bad has happened to you. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was a sibling. Maybe it was somebody that you go to school with, and this thing has happened to you. And what I want you guys to know is that you don't need an apology to forgive, and you may never get an apology. But it doesn't mean that you can't forgive somebody. It might not be made right? There may not be any consequences to that person's actions. Maybe what they took is just going to be gone, and it won't be able to be fully made right. But you don't have to be bitter, and you don't have to be angry towards that person. You don't have to let that anger dominate you. That you can extend forgiveness to them. And forgiveness isn't easy, and you might have to choose forgiveness every time the anger pops into your mind. You have to remind yourself that you're gonna choose to forgive, and that forgiveness isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you have to make, and you may have to keep choosing it, and then trust that feeling will eventually come. And maybe tonight you want to write down on a card, on a piece of paper, write down the action that was committed against you. What did they do to you that hurt you so bad? And then think about, what did that action that they did to you, what did it take away from you? What's the specific thing that it took away from you? Right? Was it a mean thing that somebody said, and that's the action? And then what's the thing that they took away from you? And then maybe it's your reputation. It took away from how other people perceive you in your school. And then what don't you do is maybe just throw it away. As a kind of a symbolic reminder to yourself that you're going to say, hey, they owe me a debt and they don't anymore. I forgive you. And maybe you want to say it out loud in front of a mirror. Maybe you want to find a quiet place like a bedroom or bathroom, wherever that quiet place is in your house, and you want to say it out loud of, I forgive you. And maybe it helps to say that person's name. And so maybe there's another type of person here that's watching tonight, and maybe you're on the flip side of that there's this idea that apologies don't complete forgiveness, but they do complement them. You don't need to have an apology to be able to extend forgiveness, but apologies do complement. They are the other side of this. And we could spend another night on guilt, and maybe you don't even feel guilty You don't necessarily have to feel guilty to know that something wrong was done, that you've committed some sort of wrong against another person. And when we've committed something wrong against somebody, just know that you've already been forgiven by God, right? When you've done something wrong, you've been forgiven by God. And that includes the things that you've done wrong against other people. But the problem is that he wasn't the only person that you wronged. And so he's not the only person that you need to confess to. And so imagine with me tonight that how much easier it is for you to forgive somebody. If you're really angry towards somebody, if somebody comes over to you and says, hey, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. And would you forgive me? How much easier is it for you to offer that forgiveness to somebody when they just simply admit that they messed up and what they did was wrong? It's a lot easier to do so. Now, it's still going to be difficult, but it's a lot easier. And so maybe tonight, maybe you're the person that needs to offer that apology to somebody that will then give them the strength that they need to be able to finally forgive and be free of this bitterness and anger that's in their heart. And so maybe that person for you, you're doing that and you've done something wrong, to go find them and apologize. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for you guys. We're going to roll those questions again. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm just so humbled. I'm just so thoughtful that man, you guys got to just so thankful that we get to spend these Wednesdays together, that we've got to do this, and just all the crisis that's been going on, that we've made a way. And I'm just so humbled that you guys have chosen to make this a part of your Wednesday night, even though it's just a kind of a shadow of what Catalyst can be and should be. And so I thank you guys, and I'm so excited to see you guys in person. Let me pray for you guys, and then we'll roll those questions and get out of here tonight. Lord, I just thank you so much for giving us this opportunity tonight, Lord. I just thank you for such an incredible God that you are, Lord, that you give us these gifts like forgiveness, Lord. And I just ask that we take to heart your story tonight of this man who was forgiven a great debt, Lord, and the way that we should be shocked by the fact that he went out and he shook down his friend because he owed him. Lord, and we're shocked by that reaction, Lord. Why wouldn't he just forgive, Lord? I just ask that be us too, that we have that willingness, and when we look into us and say, man, I'm not willing to forgive tonight, and I need to. And I need to be free from this bitterness and this rage. And so I thank you that you've given us this gift and this tool and this ability that is forgiveness, so that we might not be slaves to this anger and this bitterness that's in us, Lord. And so I just ask that we stop seeing forgiveness as some sort of way, just a scapegoat to let go, and to help out the person who did something wrong against us, that it's going to be some sort of reward, that they're going to get away with it, Lord. I ask that we stop seeing forgiveness that way. Lord, that you give us the heart and the mind and the ability to see forgiveness for what it is. It's a tool to help us, Lord, that you want us to be free, Lord. And so I just ask that we experience freedom by giving freedom to other people, Lord. And I just ask that we not see highly of ourselves, that we think so highly of ourselves that we can't understand how other people might make mistakes, Lord, that we be aware of the fact that we are broken and that we can just make those mistakes just as easily as they can, Lord. And in doing so, that we be sympathetic and easy to give out that forgiveness, Lord. And so just give us that freedom tonight. And so we just thank you and we love you. Amen.